Welcome back, friends. It's Adam Scary Stories. Go ahead, turn the lights off, settle in. Make sure those earbuds are snug because tonight, we're going somewhere the light can't follow. We're headed north, way north, to Alaska. Up there, beneath the ice and the endless silent snow, there are places that have never seen the sun, ancient caves that breathe with a cold, patient hunger. They say if you listen closely enough in the dead of the Alaskan night, you can hear them whispering. They're not calling for just anyone, they're calling for you. Now, let's begin. My name is Alex. I'm not a hunter or an adventurer. I was just a college kid trying to save up some money for tuition. So when I was offered the job as the winter caretaker for the Black Pine Lodge, nestled deep in Alaska's Brooks Range, I jumped at it. The job was simple: keep the lodge from being buried in snow until spring and make sure everything stayed in working order. The pay was good, and best of all, it offered complete solitude. I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to study and get to know myself. I couldn't have been more wrong. Black Pine Lodge wasn't a 5-star resort. It was an old 2-story hunting lodge made of dark timber located hundreds of miles from the nearest town. The owner, an old man who now lived in the city, simply handed me the keys and said, "It'll be just you and the snow out there." Just one piece of advice: stay away from the cave behind the lodge. That place, it ain't right. At the time, I dismissed his warning as the rambling of an old man. I didn't know I was about to become the caretaker of a place that was already occupied by an unseen, malevolent force. The first week was exactly as I had imagined: quiet, peaceful, and breathtakingly beautiful. During the day, I shoveled snow, chopped wood, and checked the generator. I spent my nights reading books and watching the snow fall outside my window. My only connection to the outside world was a satellite phone, which I used occasionally to talk to my cousin Ben, my only close relative. Behind the lodge, about 100 yards away at the base of a mountain, was the dark mouth of a cave. Heeding the owner's warning, I never went near it. It was just there, a black eye staring perpetually at the lodge. Things started to change at the end of the second week. It was a cold, moonlit night. I was in my room on the second floor reading. The moonlight cast an ethereal glow on the snow outside, making everything sparkle like silver. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I looked out the window. Near the mouth of the cave, standing on the pristine snow, was a tall, black shadow. It was perfectly still, like a man frozen in the ice. My heart skipped a beat. I thought it might be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a non-existent tree. I blinked, but it was still there. I watched it for a full minute, and then, in the time it took me to blink again, it was gone. I couldn't sleep well that night. The next day, I convinced myself it was just a product of fatigue and isolation. But the following night, the shadow appeared again. This time, it wasn't near the cave, but slightly closer to the lodge. It just stood there, facing my window. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the figure, but the moment the beam hit it, the shadow dissolved into the air like smoke. I knew then that this wasn't my imagination. I wasn't alone in this desolate wilderness. Over the next few days, the shadow appeared every night, each time a little closer to the lodge. I started barricading my bedroom door with a chair. I called Ben and told him everything. He urged me to leave immediately, but a severe snowstorm had blocked all the roads. I was trapped. Then came the night I will never forget. I was lying in bed, wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old lodge. It was around 3 a.m. I didn't dare look out the window. I knew it was out there somewhere. Suddenly, my locked bedroom door creaked softly. I held my breath. A dark, misty form began to seep in from under the door like black smoke. The smoke slowly coalesced in the corner of my room, taking the shape of the same tall black shadow. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, but my throat was paralyzed. The shadow stood there, motionless. It had no face, no eyes, but I could feel it staring at me, peering into my very soul. With trembling hands, I switched on the lamp beside my bed. The moment the light flooded the room, the shadow didn't disappear. It remained, just as dark and solid in the light, and then it moved. It began to glide silently, unnaturally toward my bed. I leaped from the bed and scrambled out of the room. I flew down the stairs, heading for the main door of the lodge. I glanced back. The shadow was standing at the top of the stairs, watching me. I threw the door open and ran out into the blizzard. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from that lodge. I ran until my lungs burned and I collapsed into the snow. When I woke up the next morning, I was half buried in snow about half a mile from the lodge. I was shaking from the cold and the terror. Somehow I made it back. Inside, everything was just as it had been, as if nothing had happened. I immediately called Ben, crying, and told him everything. "I can't stay here another minute, Ben. It's going to kill me." Ben heard the genuine terror in my voice. "Stay put, Alex, I'm coming," he said. "I'll find a way to get to you." 2 days later, Ben managed to arrange for a private snowcat and reached me. Seeing him was like a breath of life. I told him the whole story in detail. He was worried about my state, but was still skeptical, thinking it might be the result of my isolation and stress. "Look, let's stay here tonight," he suggested. "I want to see this for myself. If anything strange happens, we're out of here first thing in the morning." I reluctantly agreed. His presence gave me a sliver of courage. We decided to sleep in the main hall by the fireplace. The night grew deep. Everything was quiet. I started to think that maybe the shadow was a product of my solitude and wouldn't appear with Ben here. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a soft gasp from Ben. I looked over. He was sitting up on his couch, staring in horror at a corner of the room. I followed his gaze. The shadow was there, and this time, it wasn't alone. From behind it, more shadows were emerging from the walls, from the floor like spreading ink stains. The entire room was filling with them. Ben screamed and jumped to his feet, running for the main door. "Run, Alex, get out of here!" he yelled. As he reached the door, the main shadow lunged toward him with impossible speed. It grabbed him. Ben's blood-curdling scream echoed through the lodge. I watched in horror as the shadow's hands, which looked like clouds of black ink, sank into Ben's body. I was frozen in place. I couldn't move. I could only watch. And then in an instant, it was over. Ben and all the shadows vanished. A dead silence fell upon the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. I don't know how I got out of that lodge. I just remember running for days in no particular direction. A rescue team sent to clear the snow-blocked roads found me semi-conscious. I was in the hospital for months. The doctors said I had severe frostbite, hypothermia, and a complete mental breakdown. I kept telling them about Ben and the shadows, but no one believed me. They said no one named Ben had ever gone to the lodge with me. There were no travel records, no snowcat booking, nothing. According to the official report, my cousin Ben had died in his apartment in the city from a sudden heart attack. On the very same night, he was with me at the lodge. Today, I live in a psychiatric care facility. They say I suffer from survivor's guilt and severe PTSD. They say I fabricated the entire story in my mind as a way to cope with the trauma of my cousin's death. But I know what I saw. I know what happened at Black Pine Lodge that night. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear Ben's final scream. And I can see that black, faceless shadow. Whatever that creature was, it didn't just kill Ben physically. It erased every trace of his presence there, ensuring the world would believe he was never there at all. And it left me alive, with this story, with this memory to live out my days in the agony of not being believed. Sometimes in the dead of night, I think I see a shadow move in the corner of my room. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe it's still following me, waiting for me to break completely so it can take me to the same place it took Ben. Into that cold, silent, and endless darkness. My name is Frank. The old-timers call me the ghost of the Dalton because for the last 20 years I've been driving my rig on the most dangerous road in North America, the Dalton Highway. This isn't a highway, it's a 414-mile-long ribbon of gravel and ice that tethers civilization to the desolate Arctic. Out here, there are no second chances. One wrong turn and you're at the bottom of a ravine, your body entombed in ice until the spring thaw. I've seen it all. Blizzards that swallow the sun, avalanches that shake the mountains, and wrecks so bad they haunt your dreams. But what I encountered that winter was different. It wasn't a force of nature, it was an ancient dread that flows in the veins of this frozen land, and it had chosen me as its prey. This isn't a scientist's tale of discovery, this is the story of a regular trucker who accidentally knocked on the door of a world that should have remained sealed forever. It all started in late November when the winter was tightening its grip. I was hauling a shipment of supplies back from the Prudhoe Bay oil fields, heading south to Fairbanks. The journey was exhausting and all I wanted was to get home. About 200 miles out from Fairbanks, I got a call. It was a Dr. Alan Reynolds, a geologist from the University of Alaska. He and his team were researching a newly discovered ice cave near the Brooks Range. "Frank, we need your help," Dr. Reynolds said, his voice strained with worry. "Our generator died, and we have a replacement sitting in Fairbanks. Can you bring it to our camp? It's critical. We're stranded without power and the temperature is dropping fast." I don't usually take on side jobs, especially ones that take me off the main highway. But the figure Dr. Reynolds offered was too good to refuse. Besides, I couldn't just leave them to freeze to death in that icy hell. I agreed. Once I hit Fairbanks, I loaded the new generator onto my flatbed and against my better judgment headed back out into the night. Their camp was about 15 miles down a rough, unpaved service road off the Dalton. That decision would change my life forever. It was 1 a.m. when I was carefully navigating my rig down that narrow, snow-packed road. There was a profound silence all around, a darkness broken only by my truck's headlights cutting through the falling snow. Finally, I saw a faint cluster of lights in the distance. Dr. Reynolds' camp. It consisted of a few tents and a portable lab structure, and right behind it, nestled at the base of a mountain. The dark maw of the ice cave gaped like an open jaw. I unloaded the generator and Dr. Reynolds thanked me profusely. "You should stay the night, Frank," he urged. "It's too dangerous to drive back in this weather." I took his advice, deciding to sleep in the cab of my truck. I cranked up the heater and closed my eyes. Around 3 a.m., a strange feeling of unease woke me. It was the primal, unnerving sensation of being watched. I sat up and peered out the cab window. That's when I saw it for the first time. At the mouth of the cave, standing perfectly still at the edge of the darkness, was a tall, black shadow. It was vaguely humanoid but lacked any clear features. It was utterly motionless, like a statue carved from night itself. I told myself it was just a rock formation, a trick of the light. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but it was still there. It just stood there, watching the camp, or maybe watching me. A cold, unfamiliar dread washed over me. I quickly drew the curtain and tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. The next morning, I started my journey back without mentioning the shadow to Dr. Reynolds. I tried to push the image out of my mind, but it was seared into my memory. I drove all day. As evening approached, I was just a few hours from Fairbanks when I needed to stop for fuel at a desolate one-pump gas station. The place was deserted save for an old attendant dozing behind the counter. I filled up my tank and was about to climb back into the cab when I froze. Behind the gas station building, lurking in the deep shadows, stood the same tall black figure. There was no mistaking it. It was the same one. It stood perfectly still, just staring at me. My throat went dry. I scrambled back into my truck, fired up the engine, and peeled out of there, pushing my rig as fast as it would go. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror until the gas station was a tiny speck in the distance. After that night, the shadow became my constant companion. I started seeing it everywhere. Sometimes it would be half hidden behind a line of trees on the highway. Other times I'd catch a fleeting glimpse of it in a desolate turn, or its reflection would flash for a split second in my side mirror and then vanish. I stopped sleeping. My mind was a wreck, caught in a spiral of fear and paranoia. My buddies started saying I was losing it. Maybe they were right. About a week later, I was heading north to Prudhoe Bay again. The weather was turning nasty. The forecast called for a severe blizzard, a full-on whiteout. I should have turned back, but I was obsessed. I had to go back to that cave. I had to know what was happening. As I neared the Brooks Range, the storm hit with full force. A blinding sheet of white snow enveloped everything. Visibility dropped to zero. I pulled my truck over to the side of the road to wait it out. And then, through the howling chaos of the storm, I heard a voice. It wasn't a sound in my ears, but a whisper that echoed directly inside my skull. "You've returned." I looked out the window. Despite the blizzard, I could see the shadow. It was standing just a few feet from my truck. This time it wasn't a vague silhouette. Against the stark white of the snow, its black form was terrifyingly clear. Then it moved. It began to glide slowly, unnaturally toward my truck. A scream tore from my throat. I threw the truck into reverse, trying to back away, but the tires just spun uselessly in the deep snow. The shadow was now directly in front of my windshield. It raised its hand, a long, spindly appendage like a dead branch, and touched the glass. Where it touched, a thick layer of frost instantly spread across the windshield, obscuring my view. The temperature inside the cab plummeted. The heater died, and my breath plumed in front of me like smoke. And then I saw its face. It had no face. There were only two deep purple voids like black holes that drank the light. From those voids radiated a coldness and a despair so profound it felt like it could extinguish every star in the universe. I felt it pulling at my very soul. I shut my eyes and started praying. I don't know for how long. When I finally opened them, the storm had passed. The silence was absolute. The shadow was gone. The windshield was clear and the heater was working again. With trembling hands, I started the engine and turned the truck around, heading back to Fairbanks. I finally understood. Some things are better left alone. I was sick for weeks after that incident. The doctors called it a severe case of exposure and exhaustion, but I knew it was more than that. I never drove the Dalton at night again. I switched jobs and now I only do local hauls in the city in the daylight. I tried to contact Dr. Reynolds, but the university told me they had lost contact with his team. A rescue party sent to find them discovered their campsite burned and their equipment buried in the snow. There was no sign of Dr. Reynolds or his team. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Sometimes when I sleep, I see those purple eyes in my dreams and I hear that same whisper. You will come back. I don't know what that thing was. Was it an ancient spirit awakened by the geologists? Was it a tornado from the old Alaskan legends? Or was it just a hallucination born from my own fear-addled mind? I can't say for sure, but I know one thing. The Alaskan wilderness is beautiful, but beneath its beauty lie secrets. And some secrets, when disturbed, will follow you. They become your shadow, waiting for you to be alone again in that frozen wasteland at midnight, so they can pull you into their cold, dark world forever. My name is Mark. For 25 years, I've been driving an 18-wheeler on the frozen veins of Alaska. I've seen the raw beauty of this unforgiving land, the kind that steals your breath, and the kind of horror that freezes your soul. I've navigated the Dalton Highway through blizzards that turn day into night and seen accidents where rigs vanish into ravines as if they never existed. People say there are secrets buried beneath the ice. I used to think so too. I was wrong. The real secrets aren't buried under the ice, they live within it, in the ancient caves that beat like dark hearts inside the mountains. This isn't a ghost story. It's something older, something more real. It's the story of a presence that preys on your greatest weakness, your trust. And to hunt me, it wore the face of my best friend. It all started in late August. The brief summer was fading and the air was already laced with the sharp bite of autumn. My childhood friend David and I had a yearly tradition. We'd leave our troubles behind and go camping deep in the Alaskan wilderness. David was a trucker too, and we were both accustomed to the profound solitude of the wild. This year we chose a remote, little-known spot on the Kenai Peninsula, far from the usual tourist trails. It was exactly what we wanted, just us, the forest, and the silence. We set up our camp by a small, placid lake. A short distance away, nestled at the base of a mountain, the dark mouth of a cave was visible like a black stain on the landscape. We didn't pay it much mind. Caves are a common sight in Alaska. We built a fire, cooked our dinner, and reminisced about old times. As the night deepened, the sky ignited with a million stars, glittering like scattered diamonds. David, tired from the drive, turned in early, disappearing into his tent. I sat alone by the fire, soaking in the kind of quiet you can only find in the heart of the wilderness. It was around 1 a.m. when the embers of the fire were beginning to die that I heard the zipper of a tent. I turned my head. It was David stepping out of his tent. He didn't look at me. His face was blank and he moved with a strange mechanical gait, almost like he was sleepwalking. He walked slowly past the fire pit and started heading away from the camp, straight toward the cave. I called out, "Dave, where are you going?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking. A knot of concern tightened in my stomach. I thought maybe he was sleepwalking or feeling sick. I got up and started after him. He was about 50 yards ahead, his silhouette a strange, lonely figure moving toward the black maw of the cave under the moonlight. As I got closer, I called out again, "David, stop! What's wrong?" This time, he stopped. He stood with his back to me. A moment of silence hung in the frigid air. Then, in a voice that was David's yet held a strange, grating, inhuman echo, he said, "Just getting some air, Mark. Go back to the camp." Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't David, not the David I knew. I took a step back. "No, you're coming back with me," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. He turned slowly to face me. The moonlight illuminated his features, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The face was David's, but the eyes, those weren't his eyes. They were two deep black pits devoid of life, of emotion. And a faint, unnerving smile was plastered on his lips, fixed and unnatural. I said, "Go back," he repeated, and this time there was a clear threat in his voice. I froze. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I instinctively reached into my pocket and gripped my hunting knife. He just kept smiling that dead smile and took a step toward me. Suddenly, from the direction of our camp, I heard David's real voice call out, "Mark? Where are you? Who are you talking to?" My head snapped toward the camp. Standing outside my tent, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, was the real David. His face was a mask of confusion and concern. My heart leaped into my throat. I whipped my head back to look at the thing standing in front of me. The horrifying smile was still on its face. It glanced for a moment at me, then at the real David back at the camp. And then, its face began to change. It was like watching wet clay being molded by an unseen hand. Its features distorted, its skin seemed to stretch and ripple, and its eyes grew wider, deeper. It no longer looked like David. It looked like something else, something ancient and inhuman. It gave me one last look, then turned with the speed of a predator and vanished into the blackness of the cave. I sprinted back to the camp, trembling. David was alarmed by my state. I gasped out the story, my words tumbling over each other. He didn't believe me, thinking I'd had a nightmare or that the isolation was getting to me. "Mark, I was in my tent the whole time," he insisted. "There's no one else out here." But I knew what I had seen. We packed up our gear in a frantic rush and fled to our truck. We spent the rest of the night locked inside, starting at every sound, every shadow. The next morning, on our way back to the nearest town, we stopped at a small local diner. An old man sat at a corner table, a native of the Dena'ina tribe. He saw our pale, exhausted faces and asked if everything was all right. Hesitantly, I told him the entire story. He listened intently, his weathered face serious. He took a long, slow breath. "You're lucky to be alive," he said in a low, grave voice. "What you saw was a Nultsina. The outsiders call them Tornit or Bushmen." He explained that it was an ancient being that has roamed these forests for centuries. It's a shapeshifter. It can take on the form of a human, often mimicking someone close to its intended victim to lure them into its lair, a cave from which they never return. "It took your friend's shape to gain your trust," the old man continued. "If the real David hadn't called out, you would be its meal today. It preys on lone travelers and hunters. It can sense your thoughts, and it uses your deepest fears and your most trusted bonds against you." His words chilled us to the bone. We finally understood just how close to death we had come. That trip changed everything. We never went camping together again. A few months later, David quit trucking and settled down in the city with his family. To this day, he doesn't fully believe my story, but he admits that something was deeply wrong that night. I still drive my rig, but I'm afraid of the lonely roads now. I stay in motels at night and never park my truck near the woods. The incident is a deep scar on my mind. I often wake up in a cold sweat, the image of those black eyes and that horrifying smile burned into my memory. Sometimes when I'm on a desolate stretch of road and I see a figure standing in the distance, my heart stops for a beat. I press the accelerator and I don't look back. Because I know that in this world, especially in the vast frozen solitude of Alaska, not everything is what it seems. There are things out there that have been hunting us for centuries. They know our faces, they know our voices, and they come to us as friends. They are just waiting for one mistake, one moment of vulnerability, to pull you into the eternal darkness that dwells within those caves. And from that darkness, there is no return. My name is Jake. I was a history major at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. When I was assigned room 305 in Blackwood Hall, the oldest dormitory on campus, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The hall was built in the 1920s, right alongside the university's founding, and every brick seemed steeped in history. What I didn't know was that some history is better left buried. Blackwood Hall was infamous for its ghost stories. Students often joked about hearing whispers in the corridors, footsteps at night, and encountering inexplicable cold spots. But they were always just that: jokes, stories to tell around a bonfire. Room 305 was tucked away in a corner on the 3rd floor, a room that always seemed colder than the rest. I chalked it up to the old building's poor insulation, but this was a cold that seeped deep into your bones. This isn't a story about a bloodthirsty monster. It's about a restless soul, trapped beneath layers of time and stone, who wanted only one thing: to be found. The academic pressure was immense, and I often spent my nights in the library until the early hours. Whenever I returned to my room at 2 or 3 in the morning, I was met with a strange sense of melancholy, a heaviness in the air that I dismissed as my own exhaustion. Then one frigid night in November, with a blizzard raging outside, the first incident occurred. I was deep asleep when I felt a gentle tug on my blanket right at my feet. It was so slight that in my drowsy state I dismissed it as a dream. I pulled the blanket back up, rolled over, and fell back asleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, the pull was stronger, more deliberate. It felt like a child playing a prank. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The room was pitch black and silent. There was no one there. I told myself the blanket must have slipped on its own. I tried to reason it away, but a seed of fear had been planted. On the 3rd night, I decided to stay awake. I turned off the lights and pretended to be asleep, my senses on high alert. At exactly 3 a.m., I felt it, a cold, icy touch on my feet, as if someone had placed their frozen fingers on my skin, and then, with a sudden, violent jerk, the blanket was ripped off me and thrown onto the floor. I screamed. I fumbled for the lamp and switched it on. The room was empty, but this time I saw something else. On the floor near my bed were wet, muddy footprints. They led from my bedside to the old bricked-up fireplace on the far wall, and then they simply vanished, as if whoever made them had walked straight into the wall. The next morning, I went straight to the university library's archives. I needed to know the history of Blackwood Hall, specifically room 305. After hours of digging through dusty old files and microfilms of student newspapers, I found it. A headline from a 1958 newspaper: "University student missing, feared lost in caverns." The article reported that a young student named Ethan Blackwood, coincidentally a relative of the hall's founder, had mysteriously vanished from his room one night. Ethan was an avid amateur spelunker obsessed with exploring the natural cave systems that ran beneath the university grounds. Back then, a passage in the basement of Blackwood Hall led directly into those caves, a passage that was later sealed for safety. No one saw Ethan leave his room that night. He just disappeared. After a week-long search, the rescue team concluded he had likely found a way into the caves and become lost. His body was never recovered. His room? Room 305. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. I realized where the muddy footprints had come from. It was cave mud. Ethan's spirit had never left. He was still trapped down there, and his old room was the only door he could knock on. After this discovery, I requested a room change, but the housing administration dismissed my story as stress-induced fantasy. I had no choice but to stay. The nights grew worse. It wasn't just the blanket anymore. I started hearing whispers in the dead of night, the faint, desperate voice of a young man crying for help. "It's so cold. I can't find the way." Sometimes I'd hear a scraping sound from within the walls, like fingernails dragging against stone, a desperate attempt to claw a way out. I spent my nights awake, trembling with fear, just waiting for the sun to rise. One night, during the peak of another blizzard, the temperature in the room dropped so low that my breath plumed in the air. I watched in horror as a layer of condensation formed on the fireplace wall. On that misty surface, lines began to appear as if drawn by an invisible finger. They spelled out a single word: below. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I reached out and touched the wall. It was as cold as a block of ice. The moment my fingers made contact, a vision flooded my mind. I was in a narrow, dark, wet cave. A dying lantern flickered in my hand. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the stone walls felt like they were closing in. I was Ethan, and I was living his final moments. The terror, the isolation, and a cold so profound it felt like it was turning my bones to ice. I felt his despair, his desperation. He didn't want to die. He just wanted to get out. I recoiled from the wall and fell to the floor, gasping. I understood. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to tell me where he was. He wanted someone to find his frozen tomb. After that night, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and moved in with a friend off campus, never setting foot in room 305 again. I tried to tell a few professors and administrators about the cave and Ethan's story, but they treated it as a student's overactive imagination, fueled by stress and local legends. I left the university at the end of the semester. I couldn't live under the shadow of that fear. Years later, I read online that the university had begun renovating Blackwood Hall. During the construction, workers in the basement discovered an old bricked-up wall. When they tore it down, they found a narrow passage leading down into the caves. Not far into the tunnel, they found a human skeleton still clutching the rusted remains of an old lantern. It was Ethan Blackwood. His remains were finally recovered and given a proper burial. The university quietly suppressed the story. They said his spirit was at peace now. But I know some spirits never truly find peace. They become part of the place, part of its story. Even today, when I'm in a cold, quiet room, I sometimes feel a faint, icy touch on my feet. Maybe it's just a memory. Or maybe Ethan didn't like the outside world as much as he thought he would. Maybe he still returns to his old room, reminding new occupants that some stories never end, and some walls aren't just made of stone. They're tombstones. In the cold, merciless nights of Alaska, when the temperature plummets to 40 below, driving the Dalton Highway is like taking a tour through hell. People call it a road. I call it the Ice Shroud. It's a 14-mile ribbon of gravel and ice connecting civilization to the Arctic desolate. A place where one mistake means death. I've seen it all. Blizzards that swallow the sun, accidents that scar your soul, and a loneliness so profound it can drive a man mad. My name is Sam, and I've spent 30 years of my life on wheels in this frozen hell. I thought I had seen every horror this land had to offer. I was wrong. The deepest horror isn't what you can see. It's what whispers from the stones buried under centuries of ice, waiting for the right moment to claw its way out. This story began when I decided to finally retire from trucking. I scraped together my life savings and started looking for a place to live out my days in peace. I found an old Victorian-style mansion for sale about 100 miles out of Fairbanks near the Chattanooga River. It was built by some wealthy gold prospector in the late 19th century, and now stood abandoned like a ghost from a forgotten era. The price was shockingly low. I figured I could fix it up and make it my final home. The real estate agent mentioned it was infamous for a few stories, but I laughed it off. I had spent my life in the shadow of death and blizzards. A few ghost stories weren't going to scare me. I bought the place and moved in, ready to start a new chapter. The mansion was as mysterious as it was beautiful. Everything was antique and grand, but the air was thick with a strange, heavy sadness. I spent the first few weeks on repairs, fixing broken windows, repainting walls, and cleaning the old furniture. One day, while clearing out the basement, I noticed one wall looked different from the others. It was covered with wooden planks. Driven by curiosity, I pried them off. Behind them was a narrow stone passage that descended into darkness. It was the entrance to a natural cave system that ran beneath the mansion's foundation. I shone my flashlight inside. The cave was deep and silent. The air smelled of damp earth and a strange, sweet decay. I decided I'd explore it later, closed the basement door, and went back upstairs. Then the nights began. The nights that turned my peaceful retirement into a living nightmare. The first time it was around midnight. I was in my room half asleep when I heard a faint sound coming from the direction of the basement. It was the sound of a woman sobbing, a sound filled with pain and misery. I dismissed it as the wind whistling through the old pipes. The next night the sound returned, but it was clearer this time. Along with the sobs, I heard something else, a soft melodic chiming, like someone walking with ankle bells. Chime, chime, chime. The sound would drift up from the basement and then fall silent. My heart began to pound with a fear I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was just my imagination, the old house playing tricks on me. But every night at the stroke of midnight, the sounds became a ritual. First the sobs, then the chiming of bells, and then a deep, dreadful silence. One night I gathered my courage, opened the basement door, and stood on the stairs listening. The sounds were coming from inside the cave. This time the sobs were mixed with screams of helplessness, terror, and agony. And against that backdrop of horror, the chiming of the bells grew faster, more frantic, as if someone were dancing wildly to the music of torture. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it from the outside. I knew then that I was not alone in the mansion. I decided to research the history of the mansion. I spent days in the nearby town's library, poring over old records and local history books. There I found references to the old legends of the local Athabaskan tribes. One legend spoke of a creature they called the Kushtaka, a shape-shifting being, part man and part otter, that lured travelers to their doom with the sound of a beautiful voice or a crying baby, only to steal their souls in its cave. Another more disturbing story dated back to the late 19th century. When outsiders came in search of gold, some of them twisted the local beliefs for their own terrifying purposes. A cult calling themselves the Old Light had occupied the mansion. They believed that ancient powers resided in the caves beneath the earth, and these powers demanded human sacrifices to be appeased. They would lure dancers and performers from distant towns with promises of work. Then at midnight, they would force them to wear ankle bells, lead them into the cave, and sacrifice them in the name of their dark gods. Their screams and the final chiming of their bells were trapped in those stones forever. A cold dread washed over me. I realized the sounds I was hearing weren't just echoes. They were the agony of those trapped souls replaying their final moments for eternity. That night I decided I had to confront it. I grabbed my hunting rifle, a powerful flashlight, and descended into the basement at midnight. As soon as I stepped into the cave, the sounds began. The sobs, the screams, and the savage chiming of the bells. The air turned ice cold and the stench of decay became unbearable. I pushed forward, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The passage opened into a large, cavernous chamber, and what I saw there froze my very soul. Embedded in the walls of the cave were hundreds of human skeletons, frozen in stone. Many of them still had old, rusted brass bells shackled to their ankles. And in the center of the cavern, a black, smoky specter was dancing. It had no definite shape, but with its every move, a collective, agonizing scream erupted from the skeletons, and the sound of the bells echoed violently. The specter turned to me. Where its face should have been, there were only two red, glowing embers. It reached a hand toward me, and I felt a force pulling at my spirit, trying to rip it from my body. In a blind panic, I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet passed through its form as if it were smoke. It let out a horrifying laugh and lunged at me. I turned and ran for my life. I scrambled out of the cave, out of the basement, and fled the mansion, running into the snow until I collapsed. I never went back to the mansion. I got in my truck and drove away without packing a single thing. I called the real estate agent and told him I was backing out of the deal. I didn't give him a reason. I knew he wouldn't believe me. Today I'm back on the road. I drive at night because the darkness feels safer to me now than the daylight. The daylight shows you things you want to forget. The mansion still stands there, abandoned, hiding the secrets of its ice tomb. Locals say that sometimes on a cold, clear night you can still hear music and screams drifting from it. I know what I saw was real. It wasn't a ghost, it was the place itself, an agony embedded in stone and time. Sometimes when I'm alone in my cab at night, I can hear the faint chiming of ankle bells in the radio static. I immediately turn it off, push the accelerator, and pray for morning to come quickly. Because in Alaska, the snow covers everything: blood, bones, and screams. But some memories are buried so deep that not even the thickest layer of ice can keep them down forever. They just wait for the right time, for midnight, and for a stranger to pass by. My name is Jared. I'm a state trooper with the Alaska Search and Rescue Team. My job is to find the people this frozen land swallows whole. I've seen every kind of tragedy imaginable. Bodies frozen solid under the ice, climbers fallen into deep crevasses, and those who simply lose their minds in the crushing solitude of the wilderness. I thought I had become numb to death and its horrors. I was wrong. Some things are worse than death. Some stories don't end in a graveyard. They end in an ancient, unending agony trapped in these mountains since the beginning of time. This is the story of Daniel, a young hiker who went missing in the Tongass National Forest. And it's my story, because I was the one who went looking for him. What I found that day stripped away my sleep, my peace, and my sanity. Daniel was an experienced hiker. He set out for a week-long solo trip, but when 10 days passed with no word, his family reported him missing. We found his truck at the head of an old, unmarked trail. Beyond that point lay nothing but dense forest, thick fog, and a silence so profound it rang in your ears. We searched for 3 days. Helicopters, K-9 units, a whole army of volunteers. But there was no sign of Daniel. No broken gear, no scrap of clothing, not even a single footprint in the snow. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. On the 4th day, the weather turned. A severe blizzard was rolling in, and we were ordered to call off the search. But something was eating at me. I kept looking at Daniel's picture, a young man full of life, and I couldn't stomach the thought of leaving him out there in that frozen hell. I told my senior officer I was going out for just a few more hours. I'd spotted a cluster of old forgotten caves on the map. It was a long shot, but a gut feeling, a cold knot in my stomach told me I had to check it out. I took off alone on my snowmobile, heading for the area. Evening was falling and the sky was turning a bruised shade of gray. There was a strange chill in the air that wasn't just from the cold. As I neared the location, my snowmobile sputtered and died. I tried to restart it again and again, but it was dead. I was stranded. I had no choice but to start the long walk back, but then I heard it. It was a faint, melodic music cutting through the silence of the forest. It was accompanied by another sound, a delicate rhythmic chiming like someone dancing with ankle bells. Music out here in the middle of nowhere? It was impossible. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But the sound was clear and it was calling to me. I pulled out my flashlight and started walking in its direction. The sound led me to the base of a cliff where the narrow entrance to a cave was half hidden by moss and ice. The music and the chiming were coming from within. My heart hammered against my ribs with a mixture of dread and curiosity. My duty compelled me to go in, but every instinct I had screamed at me to run. I readied my service weapon and cautiously stepped into the cave. The air inside was warm and damp, thick with the sweet, cloying scent of wildflowers. This wasn't the smell of an Alaskan cave. It was something else entirely. I moved forward, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The narrow passage opened into a large central chamber, and what I saw there made me freeze in my tracks. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the warm glow of a bonfire, was Daniel. He was alive. He was smiling, a strange, dreamy look in his eyes. He was dancing, and he wasn't alone. Facing him was a woman of breathtaking beauty. She had long black hair, eyes that glittered like stars, and she wore a dress made of pure white fur. On her ankles were ornate brass bells that chimed with her every step. She was dancing with Daniel, her eyes locked on his, a captivating smile on her face. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I thought Daniel had found this local woman and they were taking shelter from the storm. "Daniel!" I called out. He didn't hear me. He just kept dancing, lost in a world of his own. I walked toward them. "Daniel, are you okay?" I said again. As I approached, the woman stopped dancing and turned to look at me. Her smile vanished. The sparkle in her eyes was replaced by a cold, predatory glare. "You should not have come here," she said, in a voice that was beautiful yet held an inhuman echo, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. And then I saw what shattered my reality forever. As the woman turned, the firelight fell fully on Daniel behind her, and I saw that his face was a mask. His eyes were hollow sockets, his cheeks were sunken, and his skin was waxy and pale. He wasn't alive, he was a corpse. I stumbled back in horror. The woman smiled, and this time there was no beauty in it, only pure, unadulterated terror. "Did you enjoy the dance?" she asked. "He has grown tired, but I have not." As she spoke, her face began to change. Her beautiful skin contorted into a coarse, wet-looking brown fur. Her face elongated into a horrifying fusion of an otter and a wolf. Her eyes turned into black, soulless voids, and sharp, needle-like teeth emerged from her mouth. She was the Kushtaka, the creature from the ancient Tlingit legends, a shapeshifter that lures its victims into a fatal dance. She raised a hand, and I saw thin, black, sinew-like threads extending from her fingers to Daniel's back. She was controlling him, making him dance like a marionette. She tugged one of the threads, and Daniel's corpse jerked, his head snapping back at an unnatural angle. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat. The Kushtaka tossed Daniel's body aside, and it collapsed to the ground in a lifeless heap of bones. The chiming of the bells stopped. "Now!" she hissed, turning to me. "It is your turn." I don't know how I escaped. I just remember running for my life, out of the cave and into the blizzard. I didn't look back, but I could hear the sound of ankle bells and a wild, shrieking laugh chasing me through the storm. The rescue team found me the next morning, unconscious and suffering from severe hypothermia. My snowmobile was right where I'd left it, in perfect working order. I told them everything, the cave, the music, the woman, Daniel's body. They didn't believe me. They said it was all a hallucination brought on by hypothermia. They searched the cave. They found nothing. No fire pit, no ankle bells, and no sign of Daniel. The cave was empty and silent. Daniel was officially declared missing, presumed dead. His body was never found. I never went back into the field after that. I quit my job and moved to a small town far away from that frozen wilderness. But I never truly escaped. Even today, in the dead of night, when everything is quiet, I sometimes hear the faint melodic chiming of ankle bells. I know it's not in my head. It's her. She's reminding me that I left her dance unfinished. I know Daniel's soul is still trapped in that cave, a puppet for the Kushtaka, forced to dance for eternity. And I know that creature is waiting for me now. She knows that one day I won't be able to resist the pull of that music, and I will return to that cave to have my last dance. My name is Liam. My wife Maya and I had grown tired of the city's relentless grind, so we took a year-long sabbatical. Our dream was to live in a remote cabin on the border of Alaska and Canada's Yukon territory, close to nature where there was nothing but silence and snow. We found a cabin for rent in a desolate stretch of Alaska right near the Yukon line. The owner, a Mr. Silas, was an old man with a face like a road map of wrinkles and an unsettling depth in his eyes. When we arrived, he handed us the keys with a single piece of advice delivered with a dead serious tone that left no room for humor. Welcome to the valley. Just remember one rule. There's a cave about a half-mile north of the cabin. Don't ever go near it. That place doesn't belong to this valley. It's something else. His cryptic warning unnerved us, but we brushed it off as local superstition. We didn't know we had just stepped into a place bound by an ancient pact, and that its caretaker was living right among us. The first few months were like a dream. We hiked in the snow-covered mountains, skated on frozen lakes, and watched night skies so clear it felt like you could reach out and touch the stars. Mr. Silas would stop by occasionally to deliver firewood or supplies. He was a man of few words, but there was a strange comfort in his presence. He seemed a part of the land itself, just as old and silent. We saw the cave many times from a distance. It looked like a black wound in the side of the mountain, a scar that even the snow couldn't hide. Silas's warning lingered in our minds, so we kept our distance. But as winter deepened and the days grew shorter, curiosity began to gnaw at us. Maya, a geologist by trade, was especially eager to investigate. It could be a unique rock formation, Liam, she'd say. Maybe there are ancient minerals inside. Silas is just superstitious. I was hesitant, but I eventually gave in to Maya's persistence. We decided we would go just once in broad daylight to take a quick look. It was the biggest mistake of our lives. One clear morning, we packed our hiking gear and headed toward the cave. As we got closer, the air grew colder, heavier. The mouth of the cave was much larger than we'd imagined. A strange, damp smell of earth and decay wafted out from it, a stark contrast to the crisp Alaskan air. "See? Nothing to it," Maya said with a smile, switching on her headlamp and stepping inside. I took a deep breath and followed her. The interior was breathtaking. The walls were covered in glittering crystals that shimmered in our lights. But despite the beauty, there was an indescribable sadness to the place. The silence was so absolute we could hear our own heartbeats. We didn't go far. About 50 feet in, we found strange objects on the floor, old rusted tools, rotting scraps of fabric, and a small wooden toy carved in the shape of a bird. What were these things doing here? Suddenly, Maya grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I listened. From the deep darkness ahead, I heard a faint melodic sound like someone humming a lullaby. It was as beautiful as it was unsettling. "Let's go," I said, and we scrambled back outside. That night, neither of us could sleep. We kept hearing that same lullaby in the cabin, feeling it whisper on the wind. The next day, Mr. Silas arrived with a load of wood. His face was grimmer than usual. "You went to the cave," he stated without looking at us. It wasn't a question. We tried to deny it, but there was something in his eyes that compelled us to tell the truth. "The air has changed," he said softly. When someone disturbs that place, it wakes. Now it will call to you. It will show you beauty. It will sing you what you want to hear until you go back to it. Who? What's in there, Silas? Maya asked, her voice trembling. Silas took a long, slow breath. This land is old, older than me. Something sleeps beneath it, a hungry thing. My ancestors called it the caretaker. It protects this valley. In return, the valley feeds it. His words sounded like the ramblings of a madman, but there was a conviction in his tone we couldn't dismiss. You need to leave. Tonight, he said, and turned to go. But it was too late. That night, a ferocious blizzard engulfed the valley. We were trapped in the cabin, and the lullaby was no longer a whisper. It was loud and clear, and it was calling Maya's name. Maya was in a trance-like state. Her eyes were vacant, and she kept staring at the door. It's calling me, Liam, she said, and there's something beautiful in there. I tried to stop her, but she was under a spell. In the middle of the night, when I dozed off for just a moment, she slipped out of the cabin. When I woke and found her gone, I ran outside like a man possessed. I followed her footprints in the snow all the way to the cave. At the entrance, Maya stood staring into the darkness from which a beautiful golden light now emanated, and the lullaby echoed. Maya, come back, I screamed. She turned to me, but there was no recognition in her eyes. Don't worry, Liam, she said with a serene smile. There's no pain here. With that, she stepped into the cave and disappeared into the darkness. I was about to run in after her when a hand clamped down on my shoulder, stopping me. It was Silas. You can't bring her back now, he said, his voice filled with a sorrowful finality. The valley has taken its price. What are you talking about? We have to call for help, I yelled. Silas looked at me, and in that moment, in the pale moonlight, I saw his true face. His eyes were no longer human. They were two deep black pits in which ancient stars swirled. His face elongated and distorted, his skin looking as tough and gnarled as tree bark. Help? He rasped in a voice that sounded like stones grinding together. I am the help. I am the caretaker, I realized. Silas wasn't a man. He was the ancient entity he had spoken of. He was the guardian of that cave, and his job was to ensure it was fed. He had brought us here. He brought them all here. The wooden toy, the old tools, they were the remnants of past offerings. The pact is old, he said as his body continued to transform. One soul for 100 years of peace in the valley. She will be safe. She will feel no pain. She will simply sleep. He moved toward me, and I stumbled backward. I ran for my life into the blizzard with no direction. The creature's horrifying laughter and the faint sound of Maya's lullaby echoing behind me. I don't know how I survived that night. A hunter found me days later, half dead from exposure. I told the police, I told everyone my story. They didn't believe me. They never found Maya's body. They never found any record of a Mr. Silas who owned that cabin. According to official documents, the cabin had been abandoned for decades. They say I created it all in my mind, a delusion brought on by the trauma of losing my wife. They say I'm crazy. Maybe they're right. But I know what I saw. I still see Silas's transforming face and Maya's empty smile when I close my eyes. Sometimes when I read the news about a hiker gone missing in Alaska or the Yukon, a cold dread fills me. Because I know they aren't lost. They've found a place from which there is no return. And I know an old caretaker still roams his valley waiting for new guests, ensuring the cave never goes hungry. My name is Eli. I'm an old man now with hands as hard as stone and cracks in my soul that will never mend. I spent my life chasing gold in the depths of Alaska in the mines we called the veins of the earth. We descended into darkness searching for light, but sometimes the darkness stares back. This story is true. It isn't a ghost tale, it's worse. It's about what lies waiting in the dark when the light is taken from you. This is the story of the Whispering Gorge mine, and of the 4 men who went down there with me but never came back up. It was the fall of 2008. Winter was closing in, and we had only a few weeks left in the mining season. We were a small 5-man crew. Me, our foreman Dave, a quiet, seasoned old-timer. Sam, a young, eager kid trying to make money for his family. Marcus, a hard-nosed guy who didn't say much, and Ben, the crew's joker, always trying to keep spirits up. The Whispering Gorge mine was old and unstable. It had been officially condemned years ago as too dangerous, but Dave was convinced there was still a rich vein of gold in its deepest artery. We were all desperate for a final payday, so we took the risk. We went in off the books, a ghost crew working a dead mine. We were working level 7, nearly a mile below the surface. The air was heavy and the silence was so profound you could hear the blood pumping in your ears. Our only link to the surface was an old crank-powered telephone. We were drilling when we heard a deep, groaning rumble. The entire mine shuddered. Rocks and debris rained down from the ceiling. It was a cave-in, every miner's worst nightmare. When the dust settled, we saw that the only tunnel out of level 7 was buried under tons of rock. We were trapped. Dave took charge immediately. "Nobody panic," he said, his voice a steady anchor. "We've got enough air for a few days, they'll find us." He tried the old phone to the surface, but the line was dead. We were cut off from the world. We had 5 headlamps. Dave ordered us to conserve battery life by using only one at a time. We huddled in a small circle around our single point of light and waited. The first few hours passed in silence. We could hear nothing but the sound of our own breathing. Then, Sam spoke up. "Did you guys hear that?" We all listened. From the deep, oppressive blackness beyond our light, we heard a faint, skittering sound like something crawling over dry leaves. "Probably just rats," Marcus grunted. Dave aimed his beam in that direction, but there was nothing, just rock and silence. A few hours later, the battery on our single headlamp began to die. The light flickered. "All right," Dave said, "I'm shutting this one off. Ben, you're up. Turn yours on." For the single heart-stopping moment between Dave turning his light off and Ben turning his on, we were plunged into absolute darkness. It was less than a second, but in that instant we heard the sound again. This time it was right next to us. A whisper. It was in a language none of us understood, but its tone was hungry and cold. Ben's headlamp flared to life, and we all looked at each other, our faces pale with fear. "What was that?" Sam asked, his voice trembling. But before anyone could answer, Dave said, "Where's Marcus?" We looked around. Marcus, who had been sitting right beside us a moment ago, was gone. The space he occupied was empty. There was no sign of a struggle, no cry for help. He was just gone. Panic began to take root. We knew it wasn't rats. Something was in the darkness with us. "Nobody turns off their light," Dave yelled. "Everyone, lights on now." But we knew it was a temporary fix. Our batteries wouldn't last forever. The next few hours were torture. We sat pressed together, our 4 headlamps creating a small, defiant pocket of light. The whispers were constant now, coming from all around us, as if a crowd was circling us just beyond the edge of the light. Then Sam's headlamp began to flicker. "No, no, no," he cried out. "Stay calm, son," Dave said, but his own voice was laced with fear. Sam's light died. In that instant, a cold, wet hand shot out of the darkness, clamped around Sam's neck, and dragged him screaming into the black. We heard a choked gurgle and then silence. "Sam!" I yelled. Dave swung his beam in the direction of the scream, but there was nothing there. Sam was gone too. Now there were only 3 of us, me, Dave, and Ben. The fear was driving us insane. Ben started sobbing, calling for his mother. Dave tried to comfort him, but we all knew what was coming. "What is this thing, Dave?" I asked, my voice cracking. Dave took a long, shuddering breath. "The old-timers used to tell stories about this mine. They called it the hunger in the dark. Said the mine was alive, that it fed on the souls of those who got trapped. I never believed them." Just as he said it, Ben's headlamp began to flicker. He screamed in terror and started smacking the side of his helmet, trying to will it back to life. "Dave, we have to do something," I shouted. Dave turned his light on me. "Eli, listen. One of us might be able to get out." He pulled a stick of dynamite and a detonator from his pack. "I'm going to try to blow the weakest part of the cave in. It might create a small opening just big enough for one man to squeeze through." "But all of us," I started to say. "Not all of us," he cut me off. "Just one. You keep your light on me while I set the charge. The second I light it, you run for that hole. Don't look back." Before I could argue, Ben's light went out. In the darkness, we heard a sickening cracking sound, like bones snapping, and one final agonized scream from Ben. Now there were two, and only two lights. Dave frantically planted the dynamite in the rockfall. "Get ready, Eli," he said. His voice was calm now. He had accepted his fate. Then my headlamp began to flicker. "No!" A sob escaped my lips. "Now, Eli, run!" Dave shouted. He shoved his own headlamp into my hands and hit the detonator. My light died. I was in total darkness. An explosion roared behind me, and I heard the sound of shifting rock. In the same instant, I heard one last blood-curdling scream from Dave, followed by a wet chewing sound. I didn't look back. I scrambled toward the small hole where a sliver of faint light was now visible. I crawled on my hands and knees, my lungs burning, the sound of whispers chasing me, calling my name now. I don't remember much about getting out of that mine. I just remember breathing fresh, cold air and collapsing onto the snow. The rescue team found me the next day. I told them everything. They dismissed my story as the product of trauma and oxygen deprivation. They said my crewmates must have been crushed in the cave-in. They sealed the mine for good. I never went underground again. I can't be in dark places anymore. I keep all the lights on in my house all the time. They say I was lucky to survive, but I know I didn't survive. That thing didn't take my life, but it took a piece of my soul. It left me alive to tell its story, to live with the fear. Sometimes when I'm alone at night and a light flickers for just a moment, in that 1 second of darkness, I still hear the whispers. And I know that the hunger in the dark is still waiting in that mine, waiting for the next light to go out. My name is Mark. For 25 years, I've been driving the haul roads of Alaska, the ones most people can't even find on a map. I've seen this frozen land in all its glory, the kind of beauty that steals your breath and the kind of horror that freezes your soul. I've faced down blizzards, seen accidents twist steel like paper, and felt the kind of loneliness that starts whispering in your head. I thought I knew every secret this place held. I was wrong. The biggest secrets aren't the ones that live on the mountains, but the ones that hide beneath them in the dark caves. Secrets that know your face, know your voice, and come to you as a friend. This story is about my best friend, Chris. We grew up together, finished school together, got our first jobs together, and fell in love with Alaska together. Chris was always the braver one, the explorer, always pushing into the parts of the woods where no one else went. I went with him because I knew we had each other's backs. This was our last camping trip. We decided to head into a remote, unmarked section of Denali National Park, a place where only old hunters' maps could guide you. We hiked for 2 days until we reached a beautiful hidden valley. There was a small lake, and on its shore, at the base of the mountain, was the dark, mysterious mouth of a cave. "Look at that, Mark," Chris said with a grin. "Our own little piece of paradise." We set up our camp by the lake. We built a fire, cooked our food, and shared old stories. As night fell, the sky exploded with 1,000,000 stars. The silence was profound, almost unsettling for ears used to the constant hum of the city. This place, it feels different, I said. It feels like it's watching us. Chris laughed. You've always been the dramatic one, Mark. This is just nature, pure, untouched. That night, as we settled into our tent, I couldn't shake a feeling of deep unease. Around midnight, I woke up. The soft crackle of the dying fire had caught my attention. I peeked through the tent flap. The fire was almost out, just a few glowing embers remained. And then I saw him. Chris was standing outside the tent, his back to me. He was just in his pants and a t-shirt despite the biting cold. He was walking slowly, deliberately toward the cave as if being pulled by an invisible string. Chris, I whispered, and where are you going? He didn't answer, he just kept walking. A spike of fear shot through me. Maybe he was sleepwalking. I quickly pulled on my jacket and boots and went after him. Chris, stop, I said, a little louder this time. He stopped at the mouth of the cave, peering into the deep blackness within. Then he slowly turned his head to look at me. In the faint moonlight, I saw his face and my soul went cold. It was Chris, but it wasn't. His eyes were empty, devoid of life, and there was a smile on his face, a wide, unnatural grin that looked like it had been carved there. It wasn't my friend's smile, it was the smile of a predator. He raised a single finger to his lips as if signaling me to be quiet, and then stepped into the darkness of the cave and vanished. I was frozen to the spot. My mind couldn't process what I had just seen. What was that? I fumbled for my flashlight and ran toward the cave. Chris, I shouted, this isn't funny. I stood at the entrance, afraid to look inside. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, but now there was another scent mixed in. A raw, animal musk. I shined my flashlight into the opening, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness. I heard a faint skittering sound from within, like something crawling over loose rock. I was about to gather my courage and go in when I heard a voice from behind me. Mark, what are you doing over there? I spun around. Standing by the tent in the dim glow of the embers was Chris, the real Chris. He was wearing his jacket, a look of confusion on his face. I saw you go into the cave, my voice trembled. Chris looked at me, bewildered. What? I just got out of the tent. I was cold. What are you doing here? The ground fell out from under me. If Chris was here, then who or what had I seen go into that cave? What had worn my friend's face? We both scrambled back into the tent in a panic. I told Chris everything, the empty eyes, that horrifying smile, the silent gesture. Chris's face went pale. It could be a tornit, he whispered. A what? Old stories, he said. Legends from the native tribes. They say there's a creature in the woods that can shapeshift. It takes the form of someone you love to gain your trust, then lures you into its cave and eats you. They also call it the Bushman. Sleep was impossible. We waited for morning, jumping at every sound, every shadow. At the first light of dawn, we started packing our gear. We wanted to get out of there as fast as humanly possible. I just want to see one thing, I said, my curiosity overriding my fear. I needed to know what was in that cave. Are you insane? Chris yelled. We'll just look from the entrance, I insisted. In the daylight, we won't go in. Reluctantly, Chris agreed. We cautiously approached the cave. In the daylight, the cave looked less menacing, but its darkness was just as absolute. We stood at the entrance, peering in. See? Nothing, Chris said, a false sense of relief in his voice. And then, we smelled it. The same raw animal musk, but much stronger this time. We were about to back away when a voice came from inside the cave. It was my mother's voice. "Mark, honey, is that you? I need help." I stood there paralyzed. My mother had been dead for 10 years. "It's the creature," Chris whispered, pure terror in his eyes. "It's playing with our minds. Let's go." But I couldn't move. That voice, it sounded so real. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Chris, the same Chris who was standing right next to me. He was smiling, that same horrifying, unnatural grin. "Come on in, Mark," it said in Chris's voice, but the tone was cold and lifeless. "We're all waiting for you." The real Chris grabbed my arm and pulled. "Run, Mark, now!" We turned and ran. Behind us, a terrible, inhuman shriek erupted from the cave, echoing through the entire valley. We ran until our lungs burned. We didn't look back. We walked for 2 days straight until we reached our truck. I never went camping again after that. I kept driving the haul roads of Alaska, but I don't look at the woods the same way anymore. Now when I see shadows between the trees, I wonder if they're just shadows or something else. Chris never recovered. He became quiet and withdrawn, haunted by what we saw. A few years later, he moved out of Alaska. He said he couldn't live in a land where even your friend's face could be a mask. I know what we saw was real. It wasn't a hallucination. In the profound solitude of Alaska, not everything is what it seems. There are things out there that have been hunting us for centuries. They know our faces, they know our voices, and they come to us as friends. They are just waiting for one mistake, one moment of vulnerability, to pull you into the eternal darkness that dwells within those caves. And from that darkness, there is no return. My name is Dr. Alan Crawford. I used to be an archaeologist. Now I'm just a broken man running from his own memories. I spent my life uncovering the secrets of ancient civilizations, trying to understand the stories written in stone and bone. I believed that history was the study of the past, of people long dead. I was wrong. History isn't dead, it's only sleeping. And some stories are so horrifying that if they wake, they pull you back into the past with them. This is the story of a cave hidden beneath a nameless glacier in Alaska's Brooks Range. It's the story of a wall that wasn't just made of stone, but was a canvas for an ancient, unending hunger. It was supposed to be the find of a lifetime. After years of research and studying old, forgotten maps, I was convinced that a prehistoric human settlement lay hidden in a desolate part of Alaska, a place no modern human had ever set foot. These were the first peoples who lived at the end of the Ice Age, among the first to cross the land bridge from Siberia. My team and I were dropped by helicopter into that frozen hell. We set up a base camp and began our search. After weeks of failure, just as we were about to give up, we found it. A receding glacier had revealed the mouth of a cave that had been buried under ice for millennia. It was a time capsule, a doorway to a world frozen in time. The inside was incredible. We found primitive tools, animal bones, and the remains of ancient fires. But the real treasure was waiting for us in the deepest chamber. There was a wall nearly 50 feet wide, completely covered in ancient rock paintings. They were older and more perfectly preserved than anything ever discovered. The paintings, done in red and black ochre, told the story of this ancient tribe, scenes of hunts, families, and seasonal rituals. But in the center of the wall, one scene stood out as terrifying as it was mesmerizing. It depicted a towering, shadowy creature with long, thin arms and glowing eyes. Before this entity, the people of the tribe had laid one of their own on the ground, chest cut open in an act of sacrifice. The image radiated a palpable sense of dread and horror. While my team was ecstatic, I couldn't tear my eyes away from that central painting. Something about it was pulling me in. We spent the next few days documenting the paintings. I photographed every image, sketched every marking. I was obsessed with the sacrificial scene. I wanted to understand who this creature was and why this sacrifice was being made. One night I couldn't sleep at base camp. The image haunted me. I grabbed my flashlight and went back to the cave alone. I stood before the wall trying to read its silent narrative. Overcome with a compulsion I couldn't explain, I reached out and touched the painting of the shadow creature. The moment my fingers made contact with the cold, rough stone, my mind exploded. The cave vanished. I was somewhere else. I was standing in a frozen night, surrounded by the same ancient people from the paintings. They were terrified, looking up at a sky where the moon was as red as blood. Before me was the scene from the wall. A young man laid out for sacrifice, a shaman standing over him with a flint knife. And then I saw it. From the mouth of the cave, the shadow creature emerged. It wasn't a painting, it was real. It floated toward the offering, its eyes burning with a hunger that felt thousands of years old. The shaman let out a piercing shriek and brought the knife down. I jerked my hand back and I was in the present again, my heart hammering against my ribs, my body drenched in sweat. What was that? It wasn't a hallucination. It was too real. I had felt the sacrifice. I had felt the terror of those people. The next day I tried to tell my team, but I couldn't find the words. How could I explain that I had seen the past by touching a rock? They would think I was losing my mind. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion and isolation playing tricks on me. But I knew I was lying. I didn't dare touch the wall again. For several days. But it was calling to me. Its secrets were a siren song. One night I returned. This time I touched the painting of a hunter facing a woolly mammoth. Again the world shifted. I was the hunter, spear in hand, a furious mammoth charging at me. I felt his strength, his fear, and his death. I realized the wall wasn't just a historical record, it was a living memory. It held the souls and experiences of everyone who had created it. I became intoxicated by the discovery. I touched every painting, lived every story. I felt the joy of birth, the warmth of love, and the agony of death. I was becoming a part of their lives. But the more I connected with the wall, the more I disconnected from my own reality. My team looked at me with worried eyes. I stopped eating. I didn't sleep. I spent all my time in that cave, whispering to the stones. One night, as I stood before the sacrificial scene, I noticed the painting had changed. It no longer showed just one sacrifice. There were hundreds of faded outlines painted one on top of the other. And the shadow creature looked larger, more powerful than before. A horrifying truth dawned on me. The wall wasn't just telling stories, it was alive, and it was hungry. Each sacrifice fed the creature and in turn fed the wall. It was a perpetual cycle. I touched the image of the creature one last time. This time I wasn't the victim or the shaman, I was inside the creature. I was looking out through its eyes. I felt its ancient, bottomless hunger. I tasted the essence of a human soul, and I saw that there was a new blank space on the wall, a fresh canvas waiting for a new sacrifice. The wall was speaking to me. It was telling me it needed another soul. It needed my soul. I recoiled in horror. I understood. The wall hadn't been sharing its stories with me. It had been grooming me. It had made me addicted to its memories so that in the end I would willingly give myself to it. I ran from the cave screaming, hearing the cries of all the souls trapped within that stone echoing in my mind. We left the site the very next day. I told my team nothing, only that the area was unstable and we had to evacuate. I published a preliminary report on my findings, but I omitted any mention of the sacrifice wall. I couldn't let the world know about that place. I couldn't put anyone else at risk. I wrote in my report that the cave had collapsed in a seismic event, making further research impossible. It was a lie. The cave is still there under the ice, waiting with its hunger. I left archaeology. I can't touch ancient things anymore. Every time I see an old stone, I can almost hear the whispers trapped inside. I teach history at a university now, but only from books. I tell my students that the past is dead and should only be observed from a distance. But I know the truth. Sometimes when I'm alone in my office late at night, I can feel the phantom sensation of cold, rough stone under my palms. I can still feel the creature's hunger, and I know the wall is still waiting for me. It knows a part of my soul is still there. It knows that one day when I am old and weak, I will answer its call. I will return to that frozen wasteland to paint my own story onto its canvas forever.